We often take for granted the incredible complexity of our bodies, especially something as vital, yet unseen, as the delicate dance of blood clotting. But as we navigate an ever-evolving healthcare landscape, understanding the pharmaceutical forces at play in blood-related disorders becomes, well, increasingly crucial.
Indeed. And today we're plunging into a particularly interesting and rapidly changing area, the global antithrombin market.
Exactly. We've compiled a range of information, and our primary source is the Global Antithrombin Market Report 2025. It really gives us a good look at where this market stands and, maybe more importantly, where it seems to be heading.
Right. Our goal in this deep dive is essentially to pull out the most significant insights from these sources for you. We'll be looking at the market's current size, the factors driving its expansion, the challenges it faces, and how these dynamics kind of differ across the globe.
Okay, so let's get right into it. What's the overall picture? Size, projections? What are we looking at?
Well, the report estimates the global market size at USD 987.24 million this year, 2025. But here's the figure that really jumps out. Projections show a substantial climb to USD 2,242.54 million by 2033.
Wow, that's more than double in just 8 years. What's behind that kind of explosive growth?
The biggest driver, really, is the rising global prevalence of thrombotic disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Conditions like deep vein thrombosis, pulmonary embolism.
Mm-hmm.
To give you a sense of the scale, the CDC estimates that just in the U.S., up to 900,000 people develop VTE annually.
900,000, that's huge.
It is, and that sheer number directly feeds the demand for antithrombin therapies. And interestingly, part of this rise is linked to aging populations and, well, lifestyle changes that can bump up the risk for these conditions.
It really underscores the growing need. Okay, so beyond just more cases, what else is pushing the market forward?
Another critical factor is the advancements in how antithrombin is actually made, specifically the progress in recombinant antithrombin production.
Recombinant, right.
Yeah. There was a National Library of Medicine report, I think October 2023, that highlighted some really fascinating potential for antithrombin beyond just clots. Research suggests it might have anti-inflammatory, even antimicrobial properties, possibly roles in COVID-19 or hemophilia treatment.
So new potential uses driving innovation.
Exactly. These findings are fueling more work in recombinant production. You get higher purity, better stability, and, crucially, less risk of contamination compared to the older plasma-derived methods.
So it's not just treating existing conditions better, but maybe finding new things it can do.
Precisely. And we're also seeing more demand for antithrombin in surgeries, other coagulation therapies. Plus, globally, there's this trend of governments stepping up support for rare disease treatments and blood disorder management. Things like the Orphan Drug Act, North America and Europe really help.
It sounds like a pretty powerful mix of factors pushing growth. Are there any potential roadblocks, challenges that might slow things down?
Oh, absolutely. A significant restraint is the cost. It's expensive to produce both plasma-derived and recombinant antithrombin.
How come?
Well, the manufacturing processes are just really intricate, complex, and the regulatory hurdles are quite rigorous. It all adds up to substantial expense.
And those high costs, I imagine, impact who can actually get these treatments.
Exactly. That's the downstream effect. High prices can severely limit access, especially in lower income regions where healthcare budgets are, already stretched pretty thin. It raises that important question about equity, about getting these advancements to everyone who needs them.
That's a crucial point. Now, you mentioned the shift towards recombinant antithrombin. Can you expand on that? What are the bigger trends shaping this market?
Certainly. As we touched on, that transition from plasma-derived to recombinant is a huge trend. It's largely driven by safety and scalability concerns with plasma products, think potential pathogen contamination, plus the limits of relying on blood donors.
So recombinant is seen as safer and more reliable.
That's the core advantage, yes. It offers a more consistent supply, free from contamination risk, and you can scale production up more easily. It reduces that dependence on human blood donors, which is a big deal for supply stability.
Okay.
And like we said, the government support for rare diseases also helps push this forward, offering incentives for companies developing these newer therapies.
Interesting. Now, the report also mentioned something about tariffs potentially impacting the pharma industry.
Yeah.
How might that affect this specific market?
Yeah, that's a really significant curveball, potentially affecting those growth numbers we talked about. The reintroduction of tariffs back in April 2025, President Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, is having a ripple effect across pharma, and antithrombin isn't immune.
Right.
These tariffs, they range from 10% up to 46%.
Wow.
And they had a whole range of things. Finished drugs, APIs, active ingredients, medical packaging, even the machinery needed for manufacturing. And a lot of this stuff comes from China and India.
So it's hitting the supply chain at multiple points. What are the immediate effects?
We're seeing increased production costs almost right away. Supply chains get disrupted. U.S. companies face new regulatory headaches. Generic drug makers are particularly vulnerable. They really rely on those APIs from China and India to stay competitive price-wise.
And it's not just generics, is it? What about the more complex biologics, like recombinant antithrombin?
Correct. Biopharmaceuticals, including recombinant products and even vaccines, are feeling the pinch. Tariffs on critical materials like stuff needed for bioproduction or special cold chain packaging can really inflate costs. Even the contract manufacturers are having to rethink their suppliers and strategies.
Are other countries hitting back with their own tariffs?
Yes, that's happening too. Several governments, the EU included, have put retaliatory tariffs on U.S. pharmaceutical exports. It creates this complex, potentially damaging web of trade barriers. It could definitely hurt the competitiveness of U.S.-made antithrombin products overseas.
It really sounds like these tariffs could throw a wrench in the works. I imagine even things like clinical trials could be impacted.
Absolutely. Trials can face delays, higher cost, because the drugs and diagnostic kits they need might be subject to tariffs. It just adds another layer of uncertainty, potentially slowing down new therapy development.
Okay, so tariffs are definitely a factor to watch. Let's pivot now to the geography of this market. Where's the demand highest right now?
Right now, 2025, Asia-Pacific is the leader. It accounts for about 37% of global revenue. That's a market size of around USD 365.28 million. And the forecast suggests it's going to stay dominant.
What's driving that strength in Asia Pacific?
It's a few things coming together. You've got a rising prevalence of blood disorders in the region, plus growing awareness about treatments. And importantly, there's a growing number of biopharma manufacturers based there, China, India, Japan, boosting both supply and local demand.
So need meets growing local capability. Is that region also expected to grow the fastest?
Yes, exactly. Asia Pacific is also pegged as the fastest growing region. We're looking at a CAGR of 12.7% between 2025 and 2033. That's driven by that rising incidence of coagulation disorders and also strong government support for the pharma and biotech sectors in many countries there.
Makes sense. What about North America and Europe? How do they stack up?
North America has the second largest share, around 29% globally this year. That translates to about USD 286.30 million, with a projected CGR of 9.2%.
Okay.
Within that, the U.S. is the biggest chunk, USD 225.89 million, growing at 9.0%. Canada's around USD 34 million, but growing a bit faster at 10.0%. Mexico's about USD 26 million, 9.7% growth.
And Europe?
Europe holds over 24% of the market in 2025. That's USD 236.94 million, with a projected CGR of 9.3%. Key players there are Germany, the UK, Russia. Germany's about USD 47 million, growing at 9.5%. The UK, nearly 40 million, growing at 10.1%. Russia, around 37 million, 8.3% growth. Then you have France, Italy, Spain, Sweden, others, all contributing significantly too.
It's interesting seeing those slightly different growth rates, even within established markets. What about the other regions, South America, Middle East, Africa?
South America has a smaller share, just over 3.8% in 2025, so USD 37.5 million. But it has the second fastest projected growth rate, 11.2% CAGR. Brazil and Argentina are key markets there.
11%, that's pretty high.
It is. The Middle East is around 4% share, USD 39.5 million, also growing fast at 11.3% CAGR. Saudi Arabia and the UAE show strong potential. Africa currently has the smallest share, maybe 2.2%, about USD 21.7 million, but still a respectable projected CAGR of 10.5%. South Africa and Nigeria are ones to watch there.
So clearly Asia Pacific is the leader in size and projected speed, but there's real growth happening everywhere.
Okay, let's break the market down differently now. How is it segmented?
Right, we can look at it in a few key ways: by product type, by clinical application, by distribution channel, how it gets to patients, and by the end user.
Okay, let's start with product type. Plasma-derived versus recombinant.
So currently, plasma-derived antithrombin actually holds the larger market share. Oh, okay. Why is that?
It's mainly due to its long history. It's been used clinically for a long time. Its efficacy is well established, and doctors are just very familiar with it.
But you said recombinant is gaining ground fast.
Exactly. Recombinant is the fastest growing segment here. Those advantages we talked about, safety, consistency, lower contamination risk, are making it increasingly preferred, especially in, say, more developed healthcare systems.
Got it. That fits the overall trend. What about how antithrombin is used in the applications?
The biggest application segment right now is treating hereditary antithrombin deficiency.
The genetic kind.
Right. Because it's often a lifelong condition needing replacement therapy, it creates this steady, substantial demand. However, the fastest growing application is treating acquired antithrombin deficiency.
Acquired. How does that happen?
It's being recognized more and more in critically ill patients, people with sepsis, major trauma, things like that. So the need is growing rapidly in acute care settings.
Interesting. So the chronic need is bigger now, but the acute need is growing faster. Okay, how do these treatments reach patients? Distribution channels.
Traditionally, hospital pharmacies have been key, which makes sense since hospitals are major end users. But reflecting bigger shifts in healthcare, online pharmacies are actually the fastest growing distribution channel now.
Online pharmacies
Mm.
for this kind of drug.
Yeah. It's driven by digitalization, and patients increasingly preferring the convenience of home delivery. It does raise some interesting logistical points, though, especially around keeping these biological products stable, often needing cold temperatures during shipping.
Right, that's a good point. So that leads to the end users. Who's actually using or administering it?
Hospitals are definitely the dominant end user currently. They're the hubs for emergency and critical care where it's often needed quickly. But mirroring that distribution trend, home care settings are the fastest growing end user segment.
Home care.
Yeah. More patients prefer self-administration at home if possible, and the infrastructure for home healthcare, the support services, have been improving and expanding.
So a definite shift towards more patient convenience, both in getting the drug and using it. Wait, with a market this big and growing, who are the main companies involved?
You're right, it's quite competitive. It's a mix of big global pharma companies and some strong regional players. The sources mention Grifols, Shire, which is now part of Takeda, actually CSL Limited, and Kedrion SPA as some of the leaders.
Okay, familiar names in biopharma. What are their main strategies in this space? What are they focusing on?
Generally, they're focused on expanding their product lines, investing in R&D for better formulations or more efficient production, things like that, improving overall efficiency. For example, Grifols partnered with Endpoint Health back in February 2022 to work on an AT3 therapy specifically for sepsis. That shows that effort to find new applications.
Right, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. And also, February 2022, Tecdow USA launched a new heparin sodium injection that's in the broader anticoagulation space, showing continued activity and competition there, too.
So it's a dynamic, competitive field with the big players actively innovating.
Ah.
Okay, to wrap this all up, what are the key takeaways you think our listeners should really remember from this deep dive?
Okay, key points. First, the global antithrombin market is set for some pretty significant growth over the next decade. That's mainly driven by more thrombotic disorders and better recombinant tech. Second, there's a clear accelerating shift toward recombinant antithrombin because it's seen as safer and more reliable. Third, Asia-Pacific is the biggest market now and is expected to stay that way and also grow the fastest. And finally, don't forget those global economic factors like tariffs, which could definitely throw some uncertainty into the mix and affect how things play out.
Fascinating stuff. And considering that rising prevalence of thrombotic disorders and all this biotech progress, it really makes you wonder about the long-term picture for patient care, doesn't it? What new therapies might emerge? How will the industry keep adapting? It's definitely a space to keep watching. Thanks for digging into this with us today.